Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Wallace Wagner, and he has not had a near-death experience, but I'm very interested in what he is studying. So, hi, Wallace.
Good morning, Peggy. Thanks for having me.
And I'm going to tell you something that I thought I seen a UFO one time, and I never believed in any of that. Like my mom would wake me up in the middle of the night, "Hey, come look," and she'd say, "There's UFO." I thought, "Oh, mom," I go back to bed. And this is really weird. So I'm just going to like throw this out there in the beginning, if you don't mind.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
So because people will be wondering like, why is Peggy got this on here? Because I'm not going to have probably any other UFO people other than you because of what direction you're going with it. Okay, so I've got my daughter Sammy in the passenger side. It's at night, and we're driving from Ohio back to Colorado. And my husband was working in Colorado for years, so we were living up there and run home every now and then, get stuff or whatever. And so it's not like I was tired. I was all chipper. It was like 2008, 2009, and we're going through St. Louis. And I say it's at night, and there's like two lanes, of like four lanes. And I glance over and I think, they must be having a Christmas party at the top of this building because it's all dark and it's just these lights, these windows. I'm thinking they must be having a Christmas party because the whole rest of the building is black. And I'm like, wait a minute. As I got closer, there's no building. I'm just seeing these windows, these lights coming through these windows. Where's the rest of the building? So like, so I told my daughter, Samantha, I'm like, Samantha, what is that? And so my rational thinking is trying to process what could this be? Okay, this must be some kind of big hovercraft, like maybe Oprah has got a hovercraft and she's like floating around looking at the city. Because I'm trying to make sense. Why is this like this? What am I seeing? And then I look and I'm like, wait a minute, that is a huge UFO. And so I'm looking at the traffic thinking, why is everybody pulling over? So I'm expecting all these cars to just start pulling over, everybody get out of their car and start pointing. Nobody's doing that. And I'm thinking, do I call 911 and say, there's this big UFO? But I think nobody else has seen it. So I'm like, I'm staying in my car because in the movies, if you get out of your car, they abduct you because my mind's just racing, trying to fit this in my head. And so I'm like, I'm going to keep driving. I'm not pulling over because nobody else is. If everybody else is pulling over, I will, but not right now. And then it was like it was following me. This great big, I mean, it's huge. It is following me. And I'm like,
Was it saucer shaped?
it was saucer shaped, just like you see in like, stuff when they portray UFOs, but it was saucer front and bottom and had lights all the way around, and it was all lit up like, light is inside these, you can see light through the windows, and it's ginormous. And I'm like, why isn't anybody else seeing this? So I called my husband on my little cricket phone at the time, and I'm like, I tell him where I'm at. It was St. Louis, right, honey? And I was like, is there a like Air Force base near here? Because I'm seeing something. And so he was like, yeah, there is one near there. And okay, well, they must have hovercrafts because there's this thing, and I described it. And so I'm not going to freak out because this has to be like a Air Force thing. It's a real thing. It's not my imagination. I'm trying to figure out what it is. And so finally, so I hang up the phone with him, and I'm relieved that I think, okay, it's just the Air Force has something they haven't told us, and it's just out here doing this, and I don't know why nobody else sees it but me. And I'm going to keep driving, and I'm going to quit looking in my rearview mirror at it because it's freaking me out. I'm going to forget it's there, and so later on, I don't see it anymore. So that's my only time I thought, and it's not like way up in the sky. Did you? No, this was like, like I said, at first I thought it was this building, and then I get closer, and I'm like, that is a big old craft. Why isn't everybody else pulling over? I do not know, So I don't know if there's any instances where people only see it and everybody else don't. That didn't makes no sense either. So I don't know.
That's an interesting thought. But did you ever consider yourself being crazy for seeing it? Or maybe that you were afraid to tell other people
Yeah,
that they might think you're crazy?
I didn't tell other people, especially when I started coming about years later. When I started coming about my NDE, coming out about my NDEs, I haven't talked about it very much because it doesn't fit into my logic, as Christians. And I got thinking about what you're talking about today. And I thought, you know what? Maybe we need to start talking about this because it seems like to a lot of people that contact everybody talks about is coming. And what are Christians going to think? Is that going to mess up their worldview like, it was messing with mine? But then I don't mean to just go on, not let you talk, and I'm going to tell you something else. My second NDE, when I was in the tunnel and I could see, it was like the tunnel was invisible, it was a dim place. And it was like you watch on TV, like a rocket shooting and it's like this loud, wind speed. It was like that. And every now and then through this tunnel, I felt like because I could see through it, like I was going through galaxy and galaxy, and every now and then be a knock. And I felt like, and I was only 25 years old, I'm trying to figure out what is this? Just like with UFO, what is this? And I'm thinking every knock, I feel like, am I going through is that like another dimension or like getting some kind of barrier? And then suddenly I'm in the white light. And so, but there was a Star Trek feel to the tunnel because it felt like I was going through space, like through galaxy and galaxy and galaxy. It was
That's
like
what everybody
determined.
says. That's
Yeah.
what everybody says. At
And,
first, you might not even realize you can move. You just feel like you're floating, and then you realize you can move.
it was like I was in this straw. Okay. It was dim, but yet the straw was kind of transparent. You could see out here, and out here was like your background. It was space. And it was definitely going somewhere. And then, years later, now that I've processed my NDE so much that I tell people, everybody thinks Christianity, Bible is so old and ancient. It is, but it's also so futuristic that we can't even imagine because the ways on the other side, like if I wanted to show you the UFO in heaven, I call heaven in that bright white where I was, bright white light, they could just bring up poof and you can see it right now. It's acting. Whether it was a real event, a memory, or something brought about just to show you an illustration of a movie that you're actually more of a movie, you're inside the movie and it's actually happening now. It's like they have that technology. And with the telepathic communication and the voices come in, there's so much wisdom that it is so beyond us, but yet it's so far in the past us. So I'm going to let you talk. I just wanted to let
Oh,
everybody
no,
know and let you know where I'm
this is
coming from.
great.
So go
I can,
right
I,
ahead. I'm
I can
sorry.
talk a lot. I guess we'll start off with what even got me studying
Yes.
NDEs and amongst the other things that I have written about. For our viewers, I've written two books, Crossing the Crevice initially, which is more scientific, and then recently Within Grasp came out, and it's more spiritual in nature. It was 2016. I was a mailman at the time, getting close to retirement. And I had just made a delivery here in our county. I'm in Bedford County, Virginia, which is in between Roanoke and Lynchburg. And I'd made a delivery to a carport. I was walking back to my vehicle, and something or somebody told me in my mind to stop and look up. And I was standing out in front of this lady's yard, and I just stopped immediately and looked up. And literally right over my head was what we now term a white tic tac. Now, this was before the government released the videos that's all over the internet and TV. Uh, this was about a year and a half before that, but it was solid, gleaming, white, cylindrical, with no wings, no nacelles, no windows. It appeared as a solid object that definitely should not have been there. Ruled out the blimp, ruled out Google Earth taking pictures, ruled out weather balloon, all of that. It was so gleaming and so perfectly white that, I really can't describe it. It was very, very reflective. And this was a beautiful, fall day in September. The sky was azure blue, just a few puffy clouds. This object let me see it, Peggy, for about 3 seconds. Then it wasn't there anymore.
How far
It
away
either,
was it?
well, that's a good question. Initially, I said maybe 2,000 feet, and I've gone back several times to the exact location. Now I'm thinking it was not that far. It could have been 1,000 to maybe 1,500 feet. You know, you don't think to grab your cell phone. That was still in my pocket, and I didn't have time anyway. You just look up and you see it, and it's like I'm trying to register what am I seeing, and then you realize, wait a minute, it's not there now. Um, maybe it was 50 feet by 30 feet. That's what I put in my book. I could be off, of course. Definitely cylindrical, definitely longer than it was, wider, had rounded ends that looked like literally a white tic tac, which is the picture or a representative picture. See if you can see that if I hold it up here, that I put on the cover of both of my books. Of course, the question started going through my mind. Did it cloak? Did it go into another dimension? Did it take off so fast I couldn't see it? I mean, my mind just started going around in circles. At the time, I was a Sunday school teacher. I grew up in a, conservative Christian environment, and here where I live, pretty much everyone are conservative Christians. So I have been told, in a church environment that you don't believe in that stuff, do you? All the UFOs, all these crafts are from the devil, just like levitation, it's from the devil. So, that's all been programmed into my mind, but yet I see it. And I did not get any sense that it was evil or from the devil. I got the sense that maybe it just wanted me to see it, to let me know that it was there. In the case, over time, it definitely changed me. It got me going back through the Bible. I looked at things differently. Um, did a lot of Bible history study, a lot of early church history study. And I'm just here to tell you that a lot of things that we have been taught are wrong. Not only are they wrong, but they've been manipulated over time to serve the purpose of the church. And, without going into a lot of detail, it's virtually changed my entire belief structure and foundation. I now operate off a different, what I call a lily pad than I ever did before. I have gone outside what Reverend Michael Carter would say, the imposed gates of Western Christianity. Those gates do have hinges. I've gone outside and realized I'm on a path. And, these books share what I have found on that path. And that includes, what we call NDEs, life after death, that we come from a realm of spirit and we go back to that spirit. So my mind is now opened. I don't operate with blinders anymore. I'm open to everything. I will evaluate it and accept what I feel is true and reject what I feel is false. And in doing so, it's like I had weights before on me. When you fall into this conservative Christianity dogma that the church implemented, you have to believe exactly the way they want you to believe. If you're anywhere on either side of those two narrow lines, you really need to question your salvation and question your Christianity, question whether or not you were really saved. I mean,
But
all hogwash
you're
to me
still
now.
Christian, right? You still go to
Well, I
church.
still claim my Jesus Christ as my master. I view him now as a brother. We're all uh, sons and daughters of God. That's mentioned in the Bible, regardless of the Apostles' Creed that you hear now that, God's only son, Jesus. We're all sons and daughters. I mean, Galatians, Romans, Hebrews, we're all mentioned like that. I've looked at the Bible now through a legitimate, open-minded lens. I still call myself a disciple of Jesus. He's one I adhere to. His words are faithful and true. And you asked, did I still go to church? There is no real church around here for me right now. Now, that's not to say I don't go to church. We're ecumenical. I've been to probably 7 different churches in the last 6 months. And my wife plays the piano at selected churches. So we go here and there. We were at an independent Baptist church last Sunday. But a lot of what I hear from the pulpit now, I can't accept. I know the Bible too well. I know the Bible history too well. I know the early church history too well. I know what the early church fathers thought that got weeded out too well. And one of those things, by the way, Peggy, I'll share with our audience, is that they may or may not know this, but reincarnation, which, as I mentioned, ties hand in hand with me, with NDEs, was accepted in the early church. Origen and other followers definitely believed in it. He had his own lines of thought on it. He was accepted, and his beliefs were accepted for the first 200 years or so in the early church. In fact, many people called him the brightest mind the early church ever had. By the time the Bible got put together by Jerome around 400 AD, most of his thoughts and his beliefs were weeded out because it would not work for what the church wanted. They wanted one God, one man, once being saved in this once lifetime. You got to get it right. And that's the theology that the global church has imparted on us for these last 1600 years. I can't accept that anymore. I was alive before I was born. I know that now. I have learned over these last 6 years to be much more in tune with my spirit and soul, which resides inside. I have learned to meditate. You don't learn that in church. You learn to pray in church. You learn to meditate, something that comes from within. And I've learned that this spirit that resides inside of me not only was alive before I was born, but was alive many times before I was born, and will be alive many times after what we call, die.
And you found that through researching the Bible?
Yeah, I did. Uh, Several things. Let me throw out some references. Jeremiah chapter 1, I believe, early on in chapter 1, God said he knew him before he was formed. And the church takes that and says, well, God knew us before we were born. That's really true. We come from a spirit world and we go back to a spirit world. To be absent from the body is to be with God. God exists as spirit, light, and love. We exist as spirit. The body is only temporary. Now we're taught that God created us the day we were born into this body. We die, and then we're in heaven for eternity, walking on streets of gold with God wiping tears from our eyes. Really? Really? I've been alive many times. Look at all the people that have had near-death experiences, and people like Edgar Cayce, and I mentioned this book, Michael Newton, Journey of Souls. Let's see if I can get that to show good. Um, life history of 29 people that got to talk about their past life experiences. It's just amazing. Pretty much they're all the same, much like what you have mentioned. And this is so real for me now, based on what people I know have told me, based on what I have read, based on what the Bible tells me, based on what I know from my own soul and spirit now, based on what an interview I had with Reverend Barbara DeLong, which is in my latest book, Within Grasp. She had actually what I call a third party NDE, and she would not mind if I shared that with you right now. She had this friend who was dying from cancer. They were close friends, and she knew that the time was near, and her friend knew that the time was near because it was terminal. Well, one night, Barbara was asleep in bed. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. She realized she was no longer in bed. She was in a tunnel with her friend. There's that proverbial tunnel again. They were both there. It was pitch black. And she took it kind of lightheartedly. She asked her friend or told her friend, "Well, I guess you croaked, didn't you?" And she said, "Yes, I guess I did." And they're standing here and they're not scared. They're just in this, what you might call realm of what we might consider spirit or unknownness or openness. There's so many words you could attach to it, but scared is not one of them. Soon they saw a dog, and this dog came up, and Barbara's friend says, "Well, that's my dog that died 11 years ago." And this dog hopped up on them both and started licking them, got dog slobber on both of them. A few minutes later, this small white light appears way down the tunnel. As they're standing there, all of a sudden, her friend can see some of her friends and some of her family. And Barbara says, "Well, I guess it's time for you to go on now." And her friend says, "Well, I want you to go with me." And Barbara says, "Well, I can't go. I can't go. I have other work to do here, so I think I'll just stay behind, but you go on." And she went on. And Barbara found herself waking up in bed in her apartment with dog slobber all over her. And it was dog slobber. You know, dog slobber. Now, how can that happen when she never left the bed? She got a call from the doctor later that morning and was told that her friend passed away. And Barbara said, "Yeah, I know. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, wasn't it?" And the doctor says, "Well, now, how did you know that?" She says, "I just know. I was there." And I found that, you know, wonderful, wonderful. I believe it totally. Um, if you know Barbara, I believe everything she tells me. This plays into so many other instances, uh, where people leave their body. And there's normally, not always, but normally a tunnel. And you feel yourself floating. And sometimes all these people look at themselves and say, "Yes, it's really me. I'm really alive. Have I died?" And some of these people are still on the operating table and they look down and see themselves still laying on the gurney or the operating table. So much of this is so personal, and it's happened by so many people. I mean, it's been estimated 9 million people in the USA have had near-death experiences. And that breaks down to about 775 a day have reported near-death experiences. And they go back even before Christ. I mean, I don't know whether you've ever heard of before, ER, a warrior that Socrates mentioned was killed in battle, and he was dead for days and then came back to life. And what he reported was amazing. He was in an area where there's luminous beings. Jesus was a luminous being. If I write a third book, that's going to be mentioned in it. We are creatures of the light. When I interviewed Barbara, I asked, was the light Jesus? No, the light's really not Jesus, although some could screw it as Jesus. The light is really where you're going. The light is really, in an essence, the spiritual realm, if you will, which is enlightened or which is light, because God is light and that's where God resides. That's where you're going. And when you're in this tunnel, you want to go to the light. It's like once you're in the tunnel, that's the first step. Not everybody goes to a tunnel, but most people do. And when you're in that tunnel, you want to go to the light. Eventually, you get to the light. If you know what you're doing and have been to this tunnel before, you already know you can move and that you're going to the light, and you get to the light faster. If this is a relatively newer experience for you, you might not even realize you can move. You may just feel like you're floating in stasis somewhere. But soon you realize you do move, and you do eventually see the light, and you realize you're moving, going towards the light. Once you get to the light, it's amazing. You're home. That's where you came from. You're home. And I'll keep harping on Dr. Newton here. He mentions, doesn't show real good with my background, sorry about that. He mentions the amazing thing is, with all the 29 people that he was able to get information from, every one of them had a guide. You think you're going to see your family, and you do see your family. I mean, when you're in that spirit world, from what I've gathered, your spirit can take the form of your family members. So if you're met with your family members, or what you can screw as family members going into the spirit world, it could very well be your family members, but know that they're just portraying that form to make you feel comfortable. The real form is nothing. You're neither male nor female, just like God, you're neither male nor female. But if it makes you feel well to be comforted going into that realm, they can appear as family members or loved ones. What I have learned also is that we're all on our own paths. Everyone is on their own path.
Now, when you say what I've learned, are you saying from Newton's books? Are you saying from
I've learned from Newton's books. I've learned from other books. I've learned from Reverend Carter, and I've learned from my personal experience that what my gut and instinct tells me, we are all on our own personal path. We all have our own challenges, obstacles, strengths, weaknesses, and we're all at different levels of, should I use the word enlightenment? Let me use the word consciousness. We are but babes. That's biblical. Jesus is much more enlightened, much more full of consciousness than we are. But Jesus in John 14 says we will do works and miracles even greater than he did. That's something to think about. Can you tell me anybody who's done works or miracles greater than Jesus did?
No.
Well, then what's he talking about? He's either a liar or it's in a future lifetime. Pick one.
Right.
There you have it.
In your study of UFOs, have you looked at anything about negative blood?
I know a little bit about that. It seems that if you have negative uh, blood, you have a tendency to be, how do I want to say this? Maybe have an abduction or see crafts more often. Is that what you've gathered?
I have done these little polls on NDE groups, and I'm finding about 85% of NDEers are negative blood, which
Interesting.
negative blood is like 7 to 10% of the population.
That's not very many. I'm positive myself, so but that's interesting. Um, Going back, where were we on the UFOs?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Um,
Yeah.
no, the Jesus said that we would do miracles greater than he did. I believe he's referring to future incarnations, without a doubt. So the big question is reincarnation, is there any type of reincarnation left in the Bible now? And the answer is yes. And I would immediately say, who was John the Baptist? He was none other than Elijah. That's mentioned by Jesus' own words. If you have the ears to hear and the eyes to see, I'll tell you that he is Elijah, the one who was supposed to come. But a lot of Christians don't understand that, and it's not taught very often in Sunday school. Um, Another thing that seems to support what we're talking about is that Paul said in 2 Corinthians that he knew somebody that went to the third heaven. Unless you know that the third heaven is mentioned in the book of Enoch, which is where we all go, which is paradise, you would not know that this guy apparently died and went to the paradise and then came back to talk about it. And another thing is that when Jesus died on the cross, the man to the right of him, Dismas, we get the idea that he had 0 pluses in his karma for society. A common criminal, a thief, burglar. You don't get the impression he was ever saved. He called Jesus into his life. He was born again. He did anything good for society. He wasn't baptized. Hanging there in just a few words. And then Jesus says, this day you'll be in paradise with me. That tells me a lot also, that a lot of what we've been taught's wrong. That where do I want to go from here? Let me say that what my gut tells me now, and definitely what's in the Bible, because one of the 3 descriptions of God in the New Testament is love, that we have this agape love which permeates the universe. Love that is measured out in such quantities that we can't understand it, absorb it, or fathom what it is. But it touches everything in the universe. And we are a part of that love. And that love lets us go back, meet our guide in this spiritual world. And the guide will explain to us what we did right and what we did wrong. And my gut tells me now that, how are you going to fix what you did wrong? Jesus says that, we're supposed to overcome our weaknesses. And you can't do that in one lifetime. I know the church says, accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior and everything's fine. Well, I've done that. I've been ordained. I've been baptized in the Jordan. I've done about every job in the church you can do, and, even covering for the pastor while he's gone. But you can't get everything right in this one lifetime. And yet it's our goal to get everything right. We want to be like Christ. We want to be perfect, don't we? How can you do that in this one lifetime? All this stuff just makes so much sense to me now. And I know that we are spiritual beings, and we're almost aliens on this planet, like Peter says. That we will take care of the planet. We'll take care of what we have to do here. We'll try to better ourselves and become like Christ. but there's a lot more in store for, for all of us. And the NDEs play right into that. All you're doing, with the NDE is getting a glimpse of where you've come from, your home, and where you're going back to, your home. That for me is what the NDE is. And for some people, it's quite touching. They don't, want to openly talk about it. They'll keep it, within, and that's fine. I certainly respect that. And anyway, I'm talking a lot. What questions do you have for me, Peggy?
Well, you just talked about keeping it within, and it seems like not all NDEers, but a lot of us do that. It's like this experience is like encapsulated in us in the secret place that we just kind of like entombed. And it seems like there's a time for it to open up and come out, and what we do with it. I've been noticing that. It's like we may not know how to express it. We don't have a name for it, or we're just not ready to share. We're embarrassed because when you open your mouth and you talk about it, it sounds so foreign.
To a lot of people, it does. And I guess that's the way Jesus was with trying to tell people that John the Baptist was really Elijah. You either accept it or you can't accept it. I mean, if you have ears, let them hear, but not everybody absorbs what you're talking about. Not everybody can relate to it. And some people will even think you're crazy. But if you're like me, I've gotten to the point where that's fine. That's where you're at on your path. I will continue on my path. I mean, I'm responsible for what I do. I will only be presented with what I did in this life, not necessarily what other people have done or not done, to me. It's my life, and I'm responsible for it. And like so many people, I've made gazoos amount of mistakes. I mean, we all have. But I know now that I'm not going to be vindicated uh, 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 for them. I'm not going to be put into hell or punished for it. I'll be presented with what I've done right and wrong. And I could have very well have an input as to what other life that I will choose or mutually be agreed upon that I take to help improve, develop, um, I don't enlarge the consciousness of my spirit and soul as time goes on, which is another thing. Uh, of course, I'm sure some other people have told you this. Time does not exist, certainly as we know it. There is no time. Time's just a construct for us here on Earth. So knowing that there's no time teaches me that we're infinite. And infinite has no end.
The life reviews people talk about, and the little tiny one I had in my second NDE, it almost makes you feel like everything we do is recorded somewhere.
Oh, it is. That's biblical. That's biblical as well. Everything we think, everything we do, everything we say. It's almost like we're in a closed loop a hard drive. It's all heard. In my initial book, Crossing the Crevice, based on what I have read in the Bible, especially with the connections with Gabriel and Daniel, I make the insertion or statement that everything we think when we pray, for example, it's taking what's in our heart and in our mind and forcing it outwards. You're going towards God. You're going, what the church would say, towards a higher source to get them to do something for you or to help you. When you do that, it's being picked up. It's like a radio signal. It's being picked up by angels out there that present your thoughts, your deeds to a higher source. And those angels, I made the point that I thought were in a lot of the crafts that we see, or what we call UAPs or UFOs. An example, Daniel chapter 9. Gabriel flew in swiftly that time. He wasn't flapping in the air like we're taught. I'm sorry. These crafts have been around just like NDEs before Christ. All cultures, all societies, everywhere around the world, we've had these crafts with entities or beings in them that did not come here to destroy, but came here to teach, just like Jesus did. Everyone
Why they
called
would,
him rabbi. That
wonder
means
why
teacher.
they would use crafts. I mean, surely in that realm, they can just, in my NDE, my second one, we were there and then we were back down earth and looking down in the future if I didn't return to my life, what that would look like. And so it's just like, why would they use crafts? I
Because
mean,
they're in bodily form. When you can also be without the body. You can, like remote viewing or something, or leaving, going to the realm. You're not in a craft then. It's just your spirit, which is formless, which is moving from point A to point B. But if you're in the body form, or you're like us, uh, uh, just from another world that is more advanced, which, by the way, your past lives and your future lives may not even be on this planet. I'm a firm believer that you may agree to take a life as another entity altogether on another planet, because it would behoove the betterment and the development of your soul and spirit. But nonetheless, if you're like us in bodily form, you do need the crafts to move around. And when you're in the craft moving around, and we know this is fact, time really doesn't exist when you're in that craft. There really is no time. I use an example within grasp that if you were in the craft and flew out maybe a 2/3 of a parsec out into space and turn around and immediately come back, you wouldn't know anybody, because time for you while you were in that craft may have appeared to be 2 or 3 minutes, but when you show back up here on the earth, several hundred years have passed. Uh, Time is not something that's fixed, that occurs everywhere. Time doesn't exist. It's like Peter says, that a day is but 1,000 years. Uh, that's not literal, but it just means that really time, as we know it, does not exist, and we can't really incorporate in our minds what infinity is, and it goes both ways, backwards and forwards. But that's really the realm that we came from, and the realm that we're going back to.
yeah, found interviewing in the ears and listened to a lot of them myself is that there's their experience, which seems to be, as long as they're telling the truth, a true experience. And then there is what they make of it, whether they then quote from the Bible or say they're not Christian and they quote from New Age books, and it's or movies or books, or then it seems like it gets lost in translation, the actual true experience. And just my take on it, because then they're like, therefore everybody's like this, therefore the world is like this, therefore they make these conclusions, and they're all different. Like, I'm wondering, like, where's the fact, where's the truth? Because when everybody makes something else of it, of a similar experience, one will say, therefore there's God, Jesus in heaven, like me. Or they'll say, so therefore there isn't God, Jesus in heaven. That's this more New Age theory type take on it. And
Well, I
so,
have an open mind now, so with an open mind, I will absorb everything that people tell me, and I'm not going to make a irrational judgment. I'll absorb it and study it And, I might come to the conclusion myself, but I'm not going to say that this is the way it is and that's the way it is. I can only share with you what I have found to be true on my personal,
Right.
what I call journey or path. And what I've told you so far is a lot of stuff that I have found, much of which I haven't been taught in school or Sunday school or from behind the pulpit. So uh,
Yeah. It seems
there,
like you taking a
there you have it.
mixture of it all, a mixture from the Bible and from New Age theories and from, I don't know,
Well,
your personal.
if you've ever read the original Koine Greek, which was it didn't make it into the Bible. It was what was originally there, which got transferred or transposed or reinvented to go into the Bible. You get a lot of different feelings on what's in there. The words continuance, continuing, things you do by choice. None of that's mentioned in what we have as the Bible today, but it was mentioned multiple times in the original Greek. So I just wanted to throw that out. Um, a lot of stuff that we have today, again, I'll say, has been manipulated and formed to form an agenda that has not changed, an agenda that promulgates power to the church and not the individual. All, we're nothing. We're to be nothing. We are to be 100% submissive, 100% in prayer, 100% if something happens, Jesus did it for you. You didn't do it yourself. That kind of rules out things like remote viewing, that removes things like levitation. I mean, I have found out that's really not right. We should be improving ourselves. We, as little gods, yes, I'm a little god because Jesus is my brother. And if you call Jesus your God, well, then guess what? We're just babes. We're immature. But somewhere down the line, we all will grow up on our own times, on our own time frames. There is no time. I mean, it's just whenever it happens, we will grow up. I go back to all these crafts and all the eras and all what we call religions around the world. They all came from the sky. They all came in crafts. They all had teachers, whether it's Vishnu or Brahma or Buddha or Quetzalcoatl or whomever. We were taught. Did we learn? Is the question. Did we learn? And I constantly remind myself of Paul. Paul had the Damascus Road experience, right? In which he was much like the shepherds in the field the night Christ was born. This light suddenly shone down around him, and this voice came from the light, which was a craft in the sky. I now know this. And he envisioned it was Jesus who was talking. We think that Paul became an apostle right after that. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. This was already years beyond when the disciples were chosen. This was after some people will say Christ died, that this event happened with Paul. What happened with Paul was that he went to Saudi Arabia for training for 3 years before he became an apostle. So between the Damascus Road experience and him becoming an apostle, he was in Saudi Arabia being taught by someone. Now, we don't know who that someone is or was. It may have been a mystery school. Some people say it was Jesus himself. What we do know, and I make this is something that really resonates with me, is that Paul had powers after that 3 years of training that he did not have before. He could look at Elymas and blind him. He brought Eucharist back from the dead. He didn't have those powers. He was a tent maker. He was a persecutor of Christians before. What gave him those powers? Another thing, even Mary Magdalene called Jesus Rabboni, rabbi, or teacher. Nicodemus called him teacher. The Pharisees called him rabbi. All the disciples called him rabbi. You can make the case that he came as a healer. You can make the case that he came to save us all. That works really good for the church. We were saved already. But we often overlook the fact that he came to teach us. And that's, portrayed again in the second half of John 14 when he says we'll do greater miracles. He taught the disciples. But what do we know? We only know that Peter took one step on the water before he panicked. That's all we know from those almost 3 years of teaching the disciples, that Peter took one step on the water and actually walked on the water that one step before he panicked and called out to Jesus to help him. Peter couldn't have done that without being around Christ for those 2.5 or 3 years. So perhaps Peter did get some of what Christ was trying to teach. I put the book of Thomas in my latest book, Within Grasp. I think Thomas got a lot of what Jesus was trying to teach. Unfortunately, it was considered New Age or Gnosticism by some, and all the Gnosticism, which was a thorn in the early church's side, was weeded out pretty much. So I have a problem with that as well, and ever did in the past. I guess naivety, being naive, came into play. Having done all the personal studies and research now, I realize that, that really should not have happened. In many respects, that's really what Jesus was trying to teach us. And what I have found out is when you get in connection with your spirit and soul, which I believe, Peggy, that you are much more in tune to your spirit and soul than you were before your NDEs. I'm probably correct on that. I know that I am. You learn that the reason we're here is to nurture that soul and that spirit. Coming from a Methodist background, we use the terms intermittently. Not everybody does, but when I say soul or spirit, I'm really meaning the essence of who you are inside of you. My job here on this earth right now, with the family I was born into, with my friends and where I live, is to nurture this soul and spirit. I never knew that before. Powers resist, in me. I want to be to where I don't have to ask for God to do something for me. I want to be like Jesus, in which I can do it myself. That's really our goal, isn't it? And people would say, well, you're New Age. We don't have a room for you in our church. Well, I turn it right around and say, that's exactly what Jesus is teaching. So don't you adhere to Jesus's teachings? We're all called brothers and daughters of God and of Christ. So I look at Christ now as my teacher, my mentor, and my brother. I don't look at him as a savior. I'm saved already. I mean, I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior back when I was naive, and that's what you do way back in, let me get this right, in March of 1973, and made a public profession. And I've been baptized 3 times, sprinkled, dunked, and baptized by a Pentecostal preacher in the Jordan just to get it right. But that doesn't mean anything. Look at Dismas. He's in paradise. I have news. Everybody is going to live. There you have it. Everyone's going to live. Now, not everyone may live or have the tunnel experience, but we're all going to be presented with what we've done right and wrong. I'm pretty sure about that. Probably 99%. Every one of us will be presented with what we've done right and wrong. And unless you have been very, I want to choose my words carefully here, careless, a killer, evil doer, constantly thinking evil thoughts. Remember, anything that you think goes out there and is recorded. Even then, you may be given one-on-one consultation or teachings in the next life, and will perhaps deter your learning. But let me just say that based on what I know now from outside sources, and what resonates with me is that we're all going to live.
I have learned from near-death experiencers I've interviewed the importance of ask, which is kind of contradictory of, what you feel, but they were in situations, and, one was even told, ask. And he's like, I can't, this is hopeless, whatever, ask, and then something comes along and saves them. And I have kind of put that into practice for myself. Is like, don't forget to ask.
I still ask. Don't misconstrue what I'm trying to say, because I'm still a babe. But I have learned that prayer and meditation really are kind of opposites of one another. You're not taught to meditate, in conservative Christian venues. You're taught to pray. What I have learned myself, and what resonates with me now, is meditation is really going inwards, where prayer is going outwards. Meditation is building up, nurturing. There's that word again. Enlightening. There's that word again. Your entity, your consciousness, allowing it to grow. It's not relying on someone else to do everything for you. You still, because we're babes, yes, I still pray. I pray every day, multiple times a day. But in the same context, I know that at some point I'll be able to turn water into wine. I won't ask for that water to be turned into wine for me. And that's biblical. It's biblical. I guess you could say, after my sighting, I've learned to connect the dots in a whole new way. The dots are there in the Bible, if you still use that as your foundation. I'm just connecting them in a different way. It certainly works for me. And there again, I'm very thankful for Reverend Michael Carter. We're very good friends. I look at him as a mentor, brother, and friend. He's written 5 books and has been on Ancient Aliens. He's a current pastor, has a church near Asheville, North Carolina now. He's an experiencer.
What you were saying brought to mind a memory. Years ago, a friend of mine, they were going bankrupt. They were getting ready to have their house sold on the courthouse steps, sheriff's sale. And she didn't want Children's Services to know it. She had got 2 little foster babies to help make the payments that they were behind. They were only, she would tell me on the phone these things, and she was only giving them like a little bit of oatmeal or a little bit of eggs to stretch things. And these little children couldn't talk, and their parents were both they were nonverbal and had some mental retardation stuff. So, I'm like the only one that knows these things. And so she's real Christian, and she's always telling me, oh, she's giving it to God. She's giving it to God. And finally, one day I called Children's Services and I reported all this. And I did it when I knew the children were there at a visit with their biological parents. and they called me, and I was in tears because she was a dear friend of mine. And I was in tears having to do this. And I knew a lot of other things too that was going on, abuse. And so a little bit later, the children's nurses called me back because of my call, they checked the kids and they had bruises on them. And I didn't know anything about this. And so they removed the kids on the spot. And so my friend called me and said, Peggy, what did you do? Of course, I'm honest. And I told her. And her reply, I'm like, oh my God, she's just going to lecture me, but she didn't. She says, how does it feel to know God worked through you? She says, she wasn't doing anything about her situation. She was praying to God to handle it. She was asking God to do it and wasn't doing anything about it. But she was telling me. And so I put it on my lap. And she's, how does it feel to know God worked through you? And she thanked me because this did need to be done. She was just, she didn't want the inedible, or she didn't want the truth to come out. She had like this marriage problem. She had this abuse problem in her home. And, she ended up getting divorced. They lost their house, but she was able to, go on with her children. She had other adopted children. And so, I see her later and I kind of feel like, I feel a little guilty. She's like, you did the right thing. But it just made me think about what you're saying is about, like, some people are like that. And Christians, I'm putting it up to God. I'm leading it to God. And I'm like, but you're not doing anything about it yourself.
Well, that's where I give some kudos really to the Mormon faith. A lot of people consider them to be a cult. For me now, after having studied multiple other religions all around the world, they're no more of a cult than a Southern Baptist is, saying once saved, always saved, which is completely different from perhaps a Methodist church belief, or perhaps some type of a belief in that you were predestined, perhaps like Presbyterians or Lutherans, but it's almost like you're being used as an intermediary, or a almost like an angel, a third party. You were a third party use, kind of like having a third party NDE that you were used for a purpose.
Like your friend Barbara, is that her name?
Right. So that's I think that's wonderful. There's more words to describe that, but that may be something that may happen to you again in the future if you are open for that.
Yeah, it happens all the time. Yeah, I get these situations. And then, we have the whole right and wrong thing. What's right? What's wrong? And I had no idea those little babies were being abused. But, they checked because I called and they found bruises. And so then, I found out what happened from her later. She come clean. But yeah. So it's been really nice and interesting. You gave me a lot to think about. And I appreciate you answering some of my questions and let me kind of go off on just kind of things I've got, rolling around my head that.
No, I love these. I love these interviews because it's really, I like for it to be two ways. I can ask some questions too, and you certainly get to ask questions. It's your program, and I'm thankful to be on it, Peggy.
Well, thank you. And I'll put links to your books in the description and your website.
My website's withingrasp.net. And I did incorporate some pictures and information on both books in there. So it allows you to realize what's in the books should you wish to purchase one or both. They are available on Amazon. I am self-published.
Okay. Me too. All right. Well, no, I'm not either. Okay. I'm freezing here. I'm going to turn the heat back on.
Yeah. Our wind's blowing 30 miles an hour here today.
Yeah. Our blower makes too much noise. So I turn it off during my interviews. So it's not so loud. So I'm anxious. I'm like frozen.
Yeah. You said like it's 9 degrees there or something?
No, it's -2 in Ohio.
Oh,
and the wind chill's like lower than that. So
goodness.
Yeah, we got like 11 what do you call them, advisories going on right now.
we have a winter weather advisory and a wind advisory and a cold weather advisory.
Yeah, Nasty. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome. I've enjoyed it immensely.
Good.
Blessings to you this Christmas season
You
and your
too.
family. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Bye-bye.